got my head out the sunroof. I'm blasting our favorite tunes. I only got one thing on my mind. You got me stuck on the thought of you. You're making me feel brand new. You're more than a sunshine in my eyes. I'm feeling like this might be my time to shine with you, with you, with you. I got my head out the sunroof. I'm blasting our favorite tunes.
Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to episode 5 of In the Middle and Out of the Box. Because of the historical reference to today of New Year's and another year, I thought it was really going to be apropos to talk about our historical preservation and historical boards in both cities and historical properties to try to get an overview of, again, the differences and maybe how we can use each other for our strengths and weaknesses and maybe improve our own cities to try to maintain more historical properties going forward. I know that there's a lot of things that can be done, so we're going to try to take a look at that today. I do hope you enjoyed last episode with the Brightline edition and hope you all had a chance to maybe take Brightline ride. I do get a lot of comments still about the pricing, and they do use surge pricing. So again, it's all based on supply and demand. So if you see a higher price for the premium and then you check in later on and there's a lower price, it will fluctuate. You can always use the Smart Car. They're just as nice. They're a little bit different, a little bit more seating. But again, the pricing is a lot different. So again, this isn't a discount train. So again, you got to keep that in mind. It's more just about time, convenience, luxury, and that kind of thing. So before we get started, I just wanted to show you I'm very excited about my first In the Middle mug. I don't know if you can see this, but it actually has my logo and my mug, and I'm very excited about it. So if anybody wants one, or let me know, and I don't know what I can figure out how much the charge is, but this is a great mug and I love it. So I just wanted to show that. I'm very excited. So, okay, so we're going to start today with Boca. So Boca has very little left of historic properties. They do have a couple residential sections in Old Florista, and they also have Pearl City, and then they have a couple sporadic buildings throughout town. But as far as their actual historic properties, they're very limited. We have, and we'll go through some of them. So let's start off. In addition to that, this is part of their strategic comprehensive plan for future land use going forward. This is for 2040. There's not even a category in here for historic properties or historic land use. So it's kind of a little bit discouraging, but I don't see much there because there really isn't at this point much left, but we're going to try to put a positive spin and hopefully keep what is there. So let's go through some of the properties that they currently have. Okay, so we have the Addison. So, as most people know that in this area, the Addison is a venue that's used for weddings and events and so forth. Again, this is a property that's been maintained, it hasn't been torn down, and it's been now put into a purpose of an event hall. It's a very popular property for its historical value. So again, there really is, a demand for historic properties for many reasons. So again, this is a wonderful property. If you haven't been, definitely go on a tour. It has it's part of that whole Addison Mizner look, Spanish, Mediterranean, so forth. So definitely take a look at this, but thankfully this was preserved. This is inside the courtyard at Addison, and I wanted to just point out something really quickly as long as we were talking about historical properties. Usually with historical properties, there's trees, legacy trees, historical trees, and they did a great job here of protecting these banyan trees, and again, that's so important. I know that in Delray, we'll get to Delray later on, but there was a huge issue with Sunday Village and a huge amount of trees, historic trees that were torn down. And we can talk about that later. But trees are also really part of the historic part of this. So it's not just the building, but we really have to take care of these old trees. Okay, so Boca still has the Boca Resort. Now it's called the Boca Raton, and actually it's painted white now when it was opened up as the Boca Raton. But again, great historic property. I've been there many times, has a guest at events and functions, used their spa, it's fantastic. The same thing, Addison Mizner, And, what a gem to have this property. And I wanted to show you a couple other pictures of it. Here's the original interior hall of the hotel. And you can see the ceiling up there and the large round arched windows, again in a Spanish Mediterranean style. Now, the picture on the left was prior to the new purchase that just happened recently. And again, I did a little bit of updating. So the picture on the right now is all white, and they did some updating. But again, at least the historical part of it is still there as far as the arches and the ceiling and so forth. So we're glad that we have that still. It's a fantastic property. Okay, now this is the Kramer House. Now the Kramer House was on Boca Raton Road, downtown. It was built in 1925, and it was demolished a few years ago. It was there on the right. You can see it was demolished. And again, this is one of those properties that really probably should have been historically maintained. We can't go back once they're not here anymore. So again, I just wanted to make sure I show you some properties that we've lost in Boca that really probably would have fit into a historical relevant property. Okay, now this is the Donaldson Apartments. This was one that was actually built in the Mediterranean style. It was an apartment house. It was located near the Boca Raton Hotel and Golf Course and the Beach Road. They tore it down a couple years ago, and I think it was in 2007. I think it was taken down, and they're going to be They're going to be actually building a huge apartment complex there, and this was part of that property. Okay, this is the Giles House. It was later home to a restaurant, a French restaurant, La Vieille Maison. It was demolished in 2011, and I mean, it looks beautiful on the left there, grandeur. It doesn't look like it was maintained, but again, historical property has some significant relevance, was built in 1927, and again, really probably should have been maintained. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. Okay, we do have the town hall, the original town hall and fire department, which is currently the Historical Society and Museum. And this was again built in 1927. So we do have this building, and that's fantastic. Hopefully it will stay. I know they just did a major renovation on it, and it looks great. But I just wish we had more properties like this in downtown. Okay, this is looking east today. I know there's a Aloueto project that's being approved. They have this modern style type of buildings that was built in the 50s on the the left and a little bit on the right-hand side. And you'll see that the new apartment buildings are on the left there. But they're looking to actually tear these down with this new project. So again, this is pretty much the only little street we have left in Boca that actually has some historical reference. So again, we need to really think about that. Okay, now a lot of people, when we say historical buildings and historical reference, everyone always thinks of the 1800s or the early 1900s. But Boca Raton actually has a lot of buildings that were built in 1947 and up, and they're called the T buildings for training. We had the air base here in Boca Raton a long time ago, and it's kind of in the area of the FAU campus. And so these T buildings are very important because they actually serve as, again, a reminder of what our history is. And historical reference buildings are usually over 50 years old. So anything that's over 50 years old can be relevant. So again, here we have a bunch of citizens that are campaigning to try to keep these buildings. And these kinds of buildings are strewn all throughout that northern part of FAU area, in the residential areas. I know there's one right on Spanish River. That's an apartment complex. And so again, these are historically relevant for that reason. These were for the servicemen. Now, believe it or not, this one obviously IBM in the old T-Rex Center, and I don't know what the rendition of the name is at this point. But again, this was built in 1970, and at this point it is considered historically relevant for those of us that are over 50. And so again, it doesn't have to be a Victorian or, an early change of the century history house. It has to also just be anything over 50 years old that has architecture that's historically relevant and so forth to be considered, sacred to save. So this is a very unique architecture. It's definitely apropos for the 70s. And so it's definitely, a gem worth keeping here also. I know that the office spaces have been reconfigured inside, but hopefully they will maintain the outside of the buildings in Boca. Okay, so we also, I mentioned we have some historical residential areas. We have the old Florista development that was in the 1920s. I think this was the first residential development when the town was starting. And again, there's a lot of houses there that are historically significant and have been saved. There are a lot of houses that are outside the city limits, and we should really probably consider further annexing those that are not being protected right at this moment in time. So again, here's a couple houses that are on Palmetto Park Road, but again, they're historically relevant, the architecture and the age, so we should try to put as many safeguards in as possible to protect these. So looking at Boca's strategic plan going forward, this is basically just a very quick snapshot. There's a very in-depth strategic plan that I have a copy of, but this is kind of just a high-level summary. They have a couple strategies for their 2022-23 Vision Zero. They want to develop art, which is fantastic because Boca really needs some more art in its public places. They want to implement sustainability and resiliency efforts, which is very important, and so forth and so on. There's a couple other bullet points there. One of the problems I don't see is the historical reference to maintaining some historical properties. The few that are left and more that can be grouped into that maybe are outside the city, or like I said, those T buildings that were used for the Boca Raton Air Base. And then also, we talked about the IBM buildings and things like that. Anything over 50 years that's historically relevant. So, we really probably need to focus more on that since there is so few historical buildings left in Boca Raton. So let's, hopefully they'll see this and hopefully they'll try to maybe amend their strategic plan a little bit. But, it's funny talking about strategic plans. When I was, in vice mayor in Highland Beach, in the first year I was there, I got a copy of Boca's strategic plan because I wanted to see kind of like what the other cities that, we border up to were doing and so forth and their ideas. And at that time, Boca had one of their strategic plans, one of their bullets was to annex Highland Beach. So I was like, wow, okay. So I called up one of the commissioners at that time and I said, so you want to annex us and take us over? And anyway, it was a running joke. And at some point somebody had that in there. So that was pretty interesting. Obviously that didn't happen and we're still Highland Beach and not part of Boca. So anyway, it's just a funny story about Highland Beach. Okay, so I want to go into Delray Beach now. So Delray actually proposed something in late fall to make historic districts all throughout the city, and they're hoping that they get commission approval in early of 2023. They also wanted to put in an Ocean Park Barrier Island district in addition to their Marina district and their Old School Square district and their Atlantic Avenue district. I guess that was still needed further study or another survey, but hopefully that will get added in also. And that Ocean Park district would include the surf shop building, and it would also include the Snappy Turtle building, because none of these buildings right now are listed on any of the national registers or local registers. So again, they're not protected in any way. So we do need to make sure that this proposal gets approved and make sure that these buildings get saved from any future development. Again, once they're gone, we can't get them back. So let's take a look at some of the buildings. Oh, here's the historic districts. So again, the historic districts comprise of, like I mentioned, the Marina, the Old School Square, the proposed Atlantic Avenue district, and there is a proposed Ocean Park district. And these would again save the buildings that are historically relevant so that they could not be altered or changed. So here's one of them. We have the Colony Hotel and Cabana Club. So on the left we have the original, and then we have the current one on the right with its vibrant colors. So again, these are just beautiful buildings and they need to be taken care of and saved. So we have the Sunday House here, which was built in 1902. And something interesting about the Sunday Village that was proposed and the developer that was doing it is that I think there was a bunch of homes that were also historic that were not maintained during the development process. And they fell into such disrepair that they wound up just having to take some of them down. And from what I was reading, when I was preparing for today, is that this is what a lot of the developers do is they take over a historical piece of property that maybe has some historical buildings and it's written into the contract that they'll be saved and so forth. And then nobody from the city watches over that. There's no watchdog group or there's no watchdog code enforcer that's assigned specifically to this property and this developer. And they just let it go into disrepair till it gets beyond and then has to be taken down. So that is one of the things that they use, and we really should make sure that that doesn't happen again. I also mentioned earlier that with the Sunday property, the Sunday Village property, there was a bunch of trees, historic trees that were taken down without permission. And again, it's just one of those other things that, without the city really watching what's going on, the developer has to be watched also. It's a team effort to make sure that what's supposed to happen happens and somebody's actually watching. It's just really about enforcement. Okay, so here's the arcade building, and I found this picture recently, and somebody posted it, and I thought, what a great property. You have that beautiful opening in the middle, and you have the spires on top, and it's just with the arched windows. Again, the Spanish Mediterranean. Supposedly, this architect worked with Addison Meisner, and that's where he got his influence from. He was one of the architects for him. And, it's just a shame that the building today doesn't look like this building, right? What a great building it would be to actually still have it in its original edition. So on the left, you see that looks like, I want to say the 30s or 40s on the left there. We still have the arched windows and the spires, but we're starting to lose, the look of the building. And then there's a current day on the right. So everyone's familiar with the wine room that's there now. There's been a couple different restaurants that have been taken over in there. Everything's been filled in the center. There's no more courtyard. And the look of the facade of the building has changed a little bit. So I tried to get the best picture I could, but there is still those spires on top, but they're not really in the original shape and form that they were. So again, it's just a shame, but at least the building's still there. Okay, so again, I had mentioned, I think it was 1 or 2 episodes ago, that I had found this beautiful postcard that showed Recreation Park, which was really Veterans Park, and on the right there. And I said, well, I wonder what it looks like today, because I know that there's, so many storefronts and where Chico's is and so forth over there, and they have the fountain. And I kind of tried to get exactly the position of where it is today. So the reason I wanted to do this was because it's not just the buildings that have to be maintained. We talked about the trees, but also, obviously besides having to widen roads and things like that with modern things, just, as far as losing that grass and losing that area and losing that park and losing, pieces of that park and so forth, we really need to make sure that we maintain. I mean, the picture above looks so much nicer than the picture below. So yes, there still is a park there, but it's obviously smaller. And I just wanted to show the comparison of that, because when you see the two, it looks very, very different. So maintaining these historic districts is hopefully going to pass, and that would be great. But it's not just about maintaining a historic district. It's about making sure that those buildings are, like I mentioned with the arcade building, maintain the integrity of the original building. So it's not just that the building is physically still standing there. But here's an example, which is not obviously down here in Florida, but I wanted to show how this building is still the same building, but it's been changed, and the facade has been changed so greatly that although it's great that it's maintained as, a historic building, you can still see there a little bit on the side. You'll see the little arched windows that still exist. But that's pretty much it. Everything else on the facade is gone. It's just beautiful architecture there on the left. It's just gone, and it's just a shame. Beautiful arches, columns, different roof line, and so forth. It's just really a shame. So this was a great example of not just the historic building, but making sure that all these little tweaks and everything else that people, want to ask for and so forth, that the integrity of the outside of the building is maintained also. Here's another example of that. Again, another building, just quickly, the historic building is still there, but what they did is they actually took off the Mansford roof on the left on the original building, and then they put in 2 more stories of an addition. So, I mean, it really kind of takes away, all the columns are gone in the front, facing the street to the right. It's just not the original historic building that should have been maintained. So we got to be really careful with all of these requests and variances and so forth that are asked for. Okay, and then closer to home, here's Docks, right? So we have Docks, the original. Here's the original, I think, facade of Docks, as best as I could find. And then we have the one up to the left, which is the more current version. And then we have the one to the right. So I know this was just recently approved, and again, I understand that this type of architecture is one of the choices, the Art Deco, that's approved for the city. But as far as Docks is concerned, it's been reduced down in the new version to this tiny little square shape that basically has just the sign and the awnings around it. If we go back to, the original, again, obviously you'd want to update it a little bit, maybe fix the signs and so forth, or different windows. But the integrity of the original historic building should be saved and preserved. That's the whole point of having it. So it's going to look very different in the bottom rendition of the current design. Okay, so getting back to how does this historical relevance really matter as far as out of the box, right? So my out of the box idea today was I noticed in Palm Beach Island that they have, Worth Avenue and so forth, their historical part, that they have actually a walking tour, which I thought was what a great idea for an out of the box idea for Delray. Delray's historic buildings are still very there and evident, and what a great idea to have an actual walking tour up and down maybe Atlantic Avenue, maybe somewhere in Pineapple Grove in that area and so forth, even down to the beach. If it's too much of a walk, it could always be having, golf carts or whatever. But the whole idea is that these walking tours, when I was looking at them, they're all sold out. I mean, people love this stuff. They love the history. What a great idea. The city could put them on, have people, guides and so forth. Again, a revenue generator. And there's so much history here in Delray. Again, co-join with the Historical Society to get this going. But I just thought, what a great idea for an out-of-box idea to have a historical walking tour. Now, I know that they have I think around the holidays, a historical home tour for the homes, and that's great. But it's just as far as an everyday, people that are visiting here all the time, and not just during the holidays, maybe would like to have historical walking tour of the downtown area and areas around that. And again, these things are very popular. They seem to be sold out. So again, an out-of-the-box idea for Delray. I just thought that would be perfect for them. Now with Boca, it's a little bit different because Boca really doesn't have any real properties left per se downtown, or very few. So they would have to take a little bit of a different idea for their out-of-the-box idea. A couple years ago, I took my family on a behind-the-scenes tour of the Breakers up in Palm Beach. And it was fabulous. It was in conjunction with the Flagler Museum up there, Henry Flagler's mansion. And after going to the museum, you would go over across and go to the Breakers Hotel, and they would take you all behind the scenes of the hotel and show you all the, the ballrooms, and just, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And, the history behind it and so forth. So we really enjoyed that. So I thought, what a great idea for Boca, since there's very limited properties that are left downtown, to use the Boca Resort as something like this. Why not bring in some revenue to do that, have a co-sponsorship with the resort, and have some behind-the-scenes tours similar to what the Breakers is doing. Now, if the Breakers can do this, the Boca Raton can do this. I know that, they consider themselves very exclusive, and I get it. But again, if the Breakers can do this, I'm sure the Boca Raton Resort can do this. So I just thought, what a great idea for Boca to have a behind-the-scenes tour of the history, because the hotel itself is beautiful, and there's so much history there. And I know a lot of people that aren't members or can stay there or whatever, or visiting from out of town, would love to have a behind-the-scenes tour of the Boca Resort and spa area and so forth. Because again, Addison Meisner's touch is there, and it's just beautiful, especially the spa and so forth. So those were my out-of-the-box ideas for today. Was a walking tour for Delray, since I do have so many historic properties, and a behind-the-scenes tour of the Boca Resort. Okay, so today I was watching, when I was researching for this week, I thought to myself, you know, there's so many things that I present that people will say, oh my goodness, I never saw something like that. I never thought of something. Where do you get these little gems from? And I just happened to come across this, and I for the science and technology, and I thought to myself, we do have a lot today, so it's going to be very interesting. I thought to myself, here's an example of two men that were put down in this little pit with a rope, and they have to figure out how to get there. And one of them uses their head and says, I'm going to use this out-of-the-box idea to get out of. And then as he starts doing it, they pull the rope up, so the other gentleman is standing there and has to figure it out. And he's just watching this other person think out of the box, and he gets out of the hole. So I thought this was a great way to start this out-of-the-box ideas for this week, because it's just so important to think differently and perspective-wise. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, and since we're on history, I saw this and I thought this was kind of interesting. Again, thinking a little out of the box here. So let me just give you a little bit of history on this. So basically, I thought about it in two ways. So Boca could utilize this and do it if everybody was sitting in the middle of Meisner on the grass on the mall in the middle there, and had this projection on the buildings around. And I thought, Delray could use this while they were doing maybe the Savor the Avenue, where they closed down the Atlantic Avenue and they have all the table in the middle of the road, and they could do this during that event. So take a look at it and let me know what you think. Okay, and we actually have some science and technology right here in Delray. So over at the Sea Restaurant, there is a robot that delivers food to your table. And of course, some people were like, do you still tip? Well, of course you still tip. It's just they're bringing food to the table. So you still have a server that handles all the other things, but they're just bringing the food to the table. But it's just interesting about how this restaurant is utilizing robot technology right here in Delray. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had an idea that this was here. So that's pretty interesting. Let me know what you think. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, and this is for all the adventure seekers. So this video I'm going to show you next is really interesting. This just kind of is brand new and just came out. Another toy. So this is for water sports. And if you really think about it, how interesting it would be to actually be able to just kind of be underneath the surface and seeing all the fish and whatever right there, and just kind of like a jet ski. So it was really fun. Just watch this. and this week for art, I found a beautiful artist that does incredible work, Sergi Cadenas out of Seville, Spain. And what's interesting about these portraits that he does is as you walk from left to right across the front of the portrait, it changes. It's very interesting. And he has very many renditions of this. I'm just picking two because I thought it was just kind of interesting to see the perspective. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And I will leave you with the art. I'm going to try to keep it short today because I know the Brightline edition last week was a little long. Before I do leave you for the art, I do want to say, please, we have lots of views. We're getting lots of views. I'd love to hear your feedback. Again, please email us at inthemiddlebdh@gmail.com. Please subscribe. I need more subscribers. And also, if you live in a development or an HOA or whatever, please send this out to as many people as possible through your HOA in Delray or Boca. And we got to get some more people watching so we can continue these. I hear a lot of positive feedback, which I thank you for, and enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you next time.